My husband thought he could cheat and get away with it, now he's homeless. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to get revenge on a cheating husband. I always imagined that if something like that happened to me, I'd just walk away with my dignity intact and never look back. Turns out I was dead wrong, because when I found out what my husband had been doing behind my back, I didn't just leave, I made sure he lost everything. I married my husband Jake, 35M, 5 years ago. On paper we had a good life. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We owned a nice house, had stable jobs, and were supposed to be building a future together. I handled all the finances, making sure bills were paid, setting money aside for savings, and planning for long-term goals. Jake, on the other hand, was a live-in-the-moment type. He made money, but he spent it just as fast. I used to think that was just who he was, and after all, every marriage has opposites that balance each other out, right? But then, a few months ago, things changed. It started with little things. Jake suddenly started working late, except his job had never required overtime before. He became more protective of his phone, always keeping it on silent and face down. If I so much as glanced at the screen while he was texting, he'd lock it immediately. He also started wearing a new cologne, one I hadn't bought him, and he was showering more often, especially right after coming home. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't the jealous type, and I didn't want to be one of those wives who freaked out just because her husband bought a new shirt or went out with coworkers. But my gut was screaming at me. Then came the money issues. Even though I managed our finances, Jake still had access to our joint account. I started noticing small withdrawals that he had never made before, not massive amounts, just enough to be suspicious. When I asked him about it, he got defensive and brushed it off with excuses like, "I grabbed lunch with the guys," or "I needed gas." He had a separate card for personal spending, one that I rarely questioned because it wasn't connected to our household expenses. But now, he was dipping into our shared savings. I felt sick. Then, one night, I got my answer. The moment everything changed. Jake had been acting especially weird that evening, glued to his phone, chuckling at whatever was on the screen, sneaking off to check messages whenever he thought I wasn't looking. It was like he had forgotten I existed. Then, right before bed, he got up and went to take a shower, and for the first time in months, he left his phone on the couch next to me. Unlocked. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was frustration, maybe it was just knowing deep down that something was very, very wrong. Either way, I picked up the phone and started scrolling, and that's when I found her. A long, disgusting text thread with someone saved as Megan Work. Spoiler alert, she was not from work. The messages were explicit, way too detailed for me to ever lie to myself about what was going on. He had been seeing her for months, telling her things he never said to me anymore, complaining about how he felt trapped in our marriage, promising her that soon things will change. I sat there, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. But I didn't cry. Instead, I took screenshots of everything and sent them to myself. Every dirty message, every lie, every promise he made to her about how he'd leave me soon. I wanted proof. Not because I planned on confronting him right away, but because I was going to make sure that when I walked away, he'd be left with nothing. I put his phone back exactly where he left it. Then I sat back, took a deep breath, and smiled, because if Jake thought he could cheat and get away with it, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The plan begins. I didn't say a word to him that night. I climbed into bed, curled up next to him, and pretended everything was fine. But in my head, I was already planning. I wasn't just going to leave him, I was going to ruin him. The next morning, while Jake was at work, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a damn good one. I explained everything, showed her the messages, and told her exactly what I wanted. Jake thought he had control over this situation, but I was about to take everything before he even realized what was happening. First, I secured my finances. Since I handled our money, I knew exactly where everything was. I started moving money into my own account. Completely legal, since most of it was mine anyway. Jake made money, sure, but he spent almost all of it on himself. I was the one who saved, who invested, who made sure we had a future. I also started collecting receipts, proof that I had been the primary financial contributor in our marriage. If he thought he was walking away with half of everything, he was in for a rude awakening. Then I started digging deeper. I hired a private investigator. If Jake was dumb enough to leave his messages wide open, I wanted to know what else he was hiding. I told the PI to find out everything. Where he went after work, how often he saw Megan, how much money he was spending on her. It didn't take long to get the results. Jake wasn't just cheating, he was using our money to take Megan on dates, buy her gifts, even pay for a weekend getaway with my money. I was done. Now, it was time to set the trap. I was about to make sure that by the time I was through with him, Jake wouldn't just be losing his marriage, he'd be losing everything. For the next few weeks, I played the role of the perfect wife. I cooked dinner, I kissed Jake goodbye in the mornings, I even asked about his day like I actually cared. All the while, I was preparing to take him down. Because while he was sneaking around with Megan, thinking he had everything under control, I was setting the stage to make sure that when this all came crashing down, he wouldn't have a single thing left. The first step was making sure he had nothing to fall back on. Jake had access to our joint bank account, but since I managed the finances, I knew exactly where every dollar was going. He liked to act like we were equal partners, but the truth was, I was the one keeping us afloat. If I didn't budget and save, we wouldn't even have a house. I started quietly moving money from our joint account into my personal account, one that he didn't have access to. Nothing too big at once, just small transfers over time so it wouldn't raise suspicion. By the time I was done, the joint account had just enough left to make it look normal, but nothing that would help him once things fell apart. Next, I canceled our shared credit card. Jake had been using my hard-earned money to pay for dinners, gifts, and hotel stays with Megan. That ended immediately. I reported the card as stolen and had a new one issued in my name only. Then I transferred every major bill into his name. The mortgage? Still mine, but utilities, car insurance, phone plans, all switched over to him. By the time I was done, he was solely responsible for hundreds of dollars a month in bills. Bills he didn't even realize he was about to be stuck with. Jake always assumed I'd take care of everything. He never checked the statements, never questioned anything. And that was about to be his biggest mistake. While I was cutting him off financially, my private investigator was still gathering dirt. And oh, did he deliver! Jake wasn't just cheating, he was fully in love with Megan. The idiot was acting like we weren't even married. He took her everywhere, fancy restaurants, weekend trips, even introduced her to his coworkers like she was his girlfriend. He was also spending thousands on her, hotel receipts from their little romantic getaways, gifts he bought her with our money, texts where he told her he was ready to leave me and just needed to figure out a few things first. And the best part? He was too stupid to cover his tracks. The receipts, the reservations, the messages, they were all connected to his email. The same email he used for our bills, his work, everything. He hadn't even bothered to make a fake account for his affair, which meant I had direct access to it all. So I compiled everything, a full file of evidence, documents, photos, screenshots, everything I would need to make sure that when I filed for divorce, he wouldn't stand a chance. Then it was time for the fun part. One Friday night, I told Jake I was going to visit my sister for the weekend. I even packed a small bag, kissed him goodbye, and pretended to be clueless. Jake looked so relieved when I left, probably because he had plans, and I knew exactly what those plans were, because Jake, the dumbass, invited Megan over to our house. How did I know? Because I had cameras. Yup. While Jake was busy screwing around, I had installed motion-activated cameras inside the house. Completely legal, since it was our marital home and I was the primary owner. But the second Megan walked through my front door, I got an alert on my phone, and I waited until I had clear footage of them together, waited until they were fully comfortable in my house, on my couch. Then I stormed in. Jake froze the second he saw me. Megan looked like she had seen a ghost. I stood in the doorway, calm as ever, holding up my phone. "Smile," I said. "You're on camera." Jake jumped up. "What the hell are you doing here?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I don't know, just dropping by my house. You know, the one you thought you could bring your side chick into." Megan grabbed her purse. I should go." I let out a short laugh. "Yeah, you probably should. But don't worry, you'll see this later. I'll be sending copies of these videos and photos to both of your families." Jake's face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I said. "In fact, I already did." And then I walked over to the coffee table, picked up his phone, and smashed it against the floor. He yelled as it shattered. "What the hell?" "Oops," I said. "Guess you won't be calling your little girlfriend tonight." Jake looked like he wanted to strangle me, but I wasn't done. I pulled an envelope from my bag and threw it at him. "By the way, these are divorce papers. You've officially been served." Megan made a run for the door, and Jake just stood there, stunned, as he finally realized he had lost. The next few weeks were glorious. Jake tried everything to stop the divorce. He begged, pleaded, even tried getting his mom involved to convince me to work on the marriage. I ignored every single attempt. And in the end, he walked away with nothing. I kept the house. I kept the savings. I kept everything. Since I had proof of his cheating, he had no leverage in court. He tried to fight for the house, but the judge laughed in his face when I showed the financial records proving I was the one who paid for it. He was completely screwed, and Megan dumped him. The second she realized he wasn't getting half of anything, she bailed. Apparently she wasn't interested in being with a broke, divorced man who had just lost his home. Last I heard, Jake was living out of his car. And me, I was free. But the best part? I wasn't even done yet. Even after I took everything from Jake, his house, his savings, his dignity, I wasn't done, not yet. Because while he was living out of his car, thinking that was the worst of it, I had a few more surprises left for him. Jake didn't just cheat on me. He didn't just lie and betray me. He spent my money on his side piece, used my trust against me, and thought he could get away with it. That wasn't something I could just walk away from. So while he was struggling to figure out where to sleep at night, I was making sure he never got back on his feet again. Destroying his reputation? The first thing I did was make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man he was. Jake had been lying to everyone, his family, his friends, even his co-workers. He had painted himself as the hard-working, devoted husband, the guy who just wanted a better marriage while secretly screwing around behind my back. That narrative? Gone. I compiled everything, the texts, the photos, the receipts, and made sure the right people saw it. His mom got a detailed email with screenshots of his affair and the court documents showing how badly he lost the divorce. She had always been the kind of woman who defended her baby boy no matter what, but after seeing how he had lied to her, even she stopped answering his calls. His friends? Oh, they got the unedited version, the one where he promised Megan that he would leave me soon, all while draining our bank account to fund his little fantasy. Turns out, most of them already disliked Megan and were only pretending to tolerate her because Jake had been so obsessed with her. Once they found out the full story, they cut him off too. And his job? Well, that was next. Making sure he lost his job, Jake worked in sales. His entire career was built on connections and reputation. His boss loved him because he could schmooze clients and bring in deals. But what do you think happens when a company realizes one of their employees has been using company time and resources to cheat on his wife? See, Jake had been texting Megan constantly during work hours. He had taken sick days to go on trips with her. And I had all the evidence to prove it. I sent an anonymous email to his boss detailing exactly how Jake had been neglecting work to screw around. I included screenshots of messages with timestamps that showed him texting Megan instead of doing his job. Within a week, Jake was fired. And because his credit was trash, since he always relied on me to make sure things got paid on time, he couldn't even rent an apartment. He was officially broke and homeless. The final nail in the coffin. At this point, Jake had lost everything. His marriage, his house, his money, his job. He had nowhere to go. And Megan? She dumped him immediately. The second she realized he wasn't getting half of my assets, she bailed. Turns out she wasn't interested in being with a broke, unemployed, homeless man. Jake tried to crawl back to me. He sent pathetic emails about how he had made a mistake, how he missed me, how he just needed another chance. He tried to play the "I lost everything, don't you feel bad" card. I didn't respond. Instead, I had my lawyer send him a restraining order notice, because the next and final step, I was making sure he could never come near me again. Jake was desperate. After losing his job and getting dumped by Megan, he was living out of his car, couch hopping, when one of his old friends felt sorry enough for him to let him crash for a night. But most of them had already cut him off. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore, especially after I made sure everyone knew what he did. At first, his emails were all about apologies. I was stupid. I was selfish. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, just talk to me. Then, when I ignored him, they turned into anger. You took everything from me. I lost my job, my house, my friends. Was that not enough? You're the real monster here. Oh, so now I was the problem? I let out a short laugh the first time I read one of those messages. Jake really thought he was the victim in all of this. He did this to himself. I just made sure he had to deal with the consequences. But after a few weeks of radio silence, Jake crossed the line. He showed up at my house. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had just gotten back from brunch with friends when I saw his beat-up car parked outside my house. I clenched my jaw. Of course, he had to try one last time. I parked in my driveway and got out of my car, already annoyed. What the hell are you doing here? Jake got out of his car looking like absolute garbage. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He had clearly lost weight, probably because no one was paying for his food anymore. I needed to talk, he said, pathetically hopeful. I crossed my arms. We don't have anything to talk about. He took a step closer, and I immediately took out my phone. Don't. You're already violating the restraining order, If you don't turn around and leave right now, I'm calling the cops." His face twisted in frustration. "Come on, don't be like this. We were together for years. You really don't feel anything for me?" "Oh, I feel something," I said, smiling. "Pure, unfiltered joy every time I remember that you're sleeping in your car." He clenched his fists. "I lost everything." I tilted my head. "No, you threw everything away. I just made sure you couldn't slither your way out of it." He sighed, defeated. I just need help. Just for a little while." That's when I burst out laughing. He actually thought that after everything, I'd be willing to help him? I shook my head. "Jake, you had a house. You had a stable life. You had a wife who took care of you, made sure you were financially secure, and loved you. And what did you do? You screwed some random chick behind my back and let her convince you that you'd have a better life without me." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. "You made your choice," I continued. "And guess what? Megan made hers too. She left your dumb ass the second she realized you didn't have a safety net anymore. That's not my problem." His shoulders sagged. "So, that's it? You're just gonna let me suffer?" I smiled. "Absolutely." I held up my phone. "Now, last chance. Leave, or I call the cops." Jake stared at me for a long moment, then finally turned around and walked back to his car. He sat there for a few minutes like he was hoping I'd change my mind. Then, when he realized I wasn't even looking at him anymore, he finally drove off. And just like that was the last time I ever saw him. Over the next few months, I barely thought about Jake. My life had never been better. I was free, I was thriving, and I was actually enjoying myself without carrying his dead weight. But then, one of my friends sent me a link to a GoFundMe page. I clicked on it, confused, and there it was. "Help Jake get back on his feet." I nearly choked on my coffee. The page was hilarious. He had written this long, pathetic sob story about how he had fallen on hard times and needed a fresh start. He left out all the details about how he had cheated, lied, and spent my money on his affair. He just painted himself as an unlucky guy who had lost everything after his marriage ended. The best part, it had been up for weeks, and he had raised a grand total of $50. $50. I laughed so hard I had tears in my eyes. No one wanted to help him. Not his friends, not his family, not even his own mother. Jake was completely alone, and I was thriving. One night, a few months after he showed up at my house, I got an email notification. Jake had finally stopped trying to contact me, but this was from his lawyer, a final notice confirming that our divorce was fully finalized, with all assets remaining in my name. That was it, the final nail in the coffin. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and just breathed it all in. Jake thought he could cheat, lie, and walk away with half of everything I built. Instead, he was homeless, unemployed, broke, and completely alone. And me? I had a house, a new life, and not a single regret. Jake used to say he was the kind of guy who always landed on his feet. Looks like this time, he fell flat on his ass, and I never looked back.